Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to the Accursed. Never before was there a family so committed to bloodshed, to death, to suffering, to battle, to carnage, than the Gaki. Oh, I know what you're thinking. The Gaki, they're so cold and aloof, they live at a remove from every single one of the hungry, they don't get involved in family politics. They, if anyone, feed ethically. They don't draw blood from their victims, or they try not to sate themselves in such debased ways. They have their own way of working that doesn't interfere with any of the rest of us. Now, the dead may disagree with that, because the Gaki prefer to feed from spirits, phantasms, and sometimes, when the need requires, the dead themselves. You can imagine there's been a lot of clashes there. But why would this result in the Gaki being so fond of bloodshed, of torture, of torment? Well, those spirits have got to come from somewhere. An ignorant hungry would say the Gaki are ethical because they're only feeding on people who are already dead. Well, the Gaki don't just wait around, hoping that a spirit will float by they can suck up and sate themselves. No, when a Gaki gets hungry, they will make these phantasms. They will kill so that they can feed. Now, that's not to say every single Gaki is a murderer, multiple or otherwise, though you'd be hard-pressed to find many Gaki who haven't at some point extinguished a life. It's more that they will frequent places where death is common, where tragedy occurs. I know a lot of Gaki, for example, that dwell in the inner cities of certain metropolises across the world, not for the view, and they don't blend in with the people in the sense they don't dress up like gangsters, they don't rub shoulders with their neighbours. They're the aged landlords. They might run the bodega down the road. They may just keep themselves to themselves, hiding in the shadows. But when there is a shooting, when there's an arson, maybe when there is an armed robbery in the corner shop that goes wrong, I guarantee you that at that point, the Gaki will be all over it like flies, looking for phantasms that are floating around, lost, not sure what happened. Well, that's a very quick meal, what you might call fast food for a Gaki. Obviously, in certain parts of the world, that is easier than others, and especially if there is a war ongoing, the kind of lives that get truncated by violence, especially on a massive scale, are like catnip to the Gaki. There are very few hungry that will happily feed on the blood of corpses, but the Gaki love being around an array of corpses because the phantasms will start emerging from their mouths, wondering where I am, what happened to me, and before anyone can answer, the Gaki has already wolfed them down. There's a faction of the Gaki family by the name of, well, they like to consider themselves Parking Attendants. Yes, I know that's a very strange title, but it's because they have a distinction, a delineation, if you will, between short-term parking and long-term parking. What does that mean? Well, it is how they classify phantasms. You see, the parking attendants, they only, or claim to only feed on phantasms that have only been around for a matter of hours. If they are there for beyond a few days, then they are untouchable. They have a few reasons for this, but the main one, the one they advertise, is when a phantasm first manifests, it's barely even sentient. It doesn't even know what's going on. Surely it is more ethical to feed on someone who has only just died. What is the difference between consuming the spirit now and letting it pass on to its great reward? They say. It would be like it was barely here. The long-term parking is more of an issue, they say, because if a phantasm has been left to grow in power, in potency, in sentience, develop feelings, thoughts, interact with people, leave an emotional imprint on the world, consuming a spirit like that, well, that's tantamount to murder. We wouldn't do that. There's a darker, more hidden reason, and it is that word again, untouchable. These parking attendant Gaki, they will tell you quietly. What's worse is that the phantasms that have been around for quite some time, they pick up illnesses, psychoses, The kinds of things you just don't want to put into your system. Why would we digest something like that if we had the choice? Sometimes they don't have the choice, and they have to go for the riskier meal, and they have to compromise with their ethical concerns, but that's the nature of the Gaki. Now, I expect you've heard that Gaki like frequenting morgues, mortuaries, funeral homes, graveyards, cemeteries, that kind of thing. All true. And certainly, from a certain time in history, you would find your spectres wandering around cemeteries quite frequently. Therefore, on a given Saturday night, that is where all the Gaki would go to hang out, while all your black hearts and your heirs are going to roadhouses and nightclubs across town to party and drink their fill. The Gaki go out into the cold night air, start stepping between the headstones, looking for a lost spirit, so they can sate themselves. That isn't as common these days as it used to be, and part of the reason is there's just fewer people getting buried. More people get cremated, and for whatever reason, a cremated body tends to leave a spirit less. You'd have to ask the Gaki, or indeed one of the dead, why that happens to be. But there's another reason. It's as fewer people go to graveyards to celebrate their dead. The Gaki stumbled upon this theory, and it's now widely assumed to be fact, that spirits don't just manifest because of a tortured death, but because of the memory of the living. So if a family every week comes back to a gravesite to place flowers on a grave, yes, there are the occasional spirits that will lay to rest, that honouring the dead will bring them peace. But there are other spirits who have an emotional attunement to their family, who are essentially being summoned by this memory. That they would come back, and the Gaki would be waiting there to ensure that, no, peace is what you want, and I will take a piece of you now. So, because fewer people visit the graveside these days, fewer people go and lay flowers, fewer people cry at the headstone, now it's a much more isolated experience. The Gaki mourn that. They don't mourn the dead. They mourn the fact that communal grieving is becoming a thing of the past. People these days prefer to post their grief online, and that doesn't generate phantasms. People prefer to hide in silence because it's shameful to cry in public. The Gaki don't like that either. They like emotional turmoil, because through emotional turmoil, the dead rise. And when the dead rise, it's buffet time for the Gaki. You would be forgiven for thinking that the Gaki are a predominantly East Asian family. The name, after all, is Japanese in origin, the Hungry Dead. And while there is definitely a strong contingent of the Gaki based in Japan, they are all over the world. My records tell me that the Gaki first came into cosmopolitan existence around 500 years ago. They may have existed in East Asia for far longer than that, but they've proliferated. They are not regionally based. And in fact, what I would tell you is there is something markedly interesting about the fact that the Gaki are one of the very few families that have a name that is not, I suppose, immediately recognized as English. As in, the Gaki have not just been called the Hungry Dead. They have not just been called the Spirit Eaters. They have not just been called consumers of the dead or something of that ilk. They are still the Gaki. And that is because the Gaki ancestry, going all the way back up to the Matriarch, a lofty and scary lady, I can tell you. I once shared a drink with her, and it was an experience I will never quite forget. Terrifying to behold. If you are familiar with the work of Takashi Miike, you will maybe be able to picture the kind of person I'm talking about. She expressed to me how important names are to the Gaki. She said, with a name, you can accomplish anything. With the name of a dead person, you can summon them. With the name of a living person, you can curse them. With our name, we give ourselves strength. We give ourselves identity. The Black Hearts, what does Black Heart even mean? It's a metaphor. That's not a name. The heirs. Heirs to what? You hear the heirs calling themselves Karnsteins. You hear them calling themselves Draculas. You hear them calling themselves Plantagenets. You hear the heirs calling themselves all manner of things. But what is an heir? An heir to what? But we are Gaki, and Gaki are known. And that doesn't give people power over us. It gives us power over them, especially in our homeland, our ancestral homeland, where everyone fears the Gaki. Because the Gaki run a magnificent extortion service. And this isn't exclusive to Japan and more broadly East Asia. As I say, it's all over the world. Protection for your spirit. Oh, the dead have thoughts on this, I can tell you. The Gaki will tell you, we will ensure that if you come back as a phantasm, if you die and for whatever reason come back, we will ensure that no harm comes to you. That you will not be extinguished, you will not be consumed, you will not be expelled. You are under our protection. And if you ever fail to make payment, if you ever fail to make tribute, if you ever fail to deal with us how we want you to deal with us, we will eat you. Every morsel, every ounce of ectoplasm will be swallowed, consumed, purged from existence. You will be as if you never were. It's an interesting form of extortion because, of course, a lot of people are very interested in a sense of immortality, and having Gaki support, almost mercenary support in that regard, is appealing to people who really very much fear death. But as soon as you get on the hook to them, that possibility of not being able to repay, that possibility of not being able to settle your debt will be hanging over you, and the Gaki will be keeping their ledger, because when you don't pay, well, your death can be arranged and your phantasm can be swiftly consumed. The Gaki aren't all about murder. They are students, of course, of death. They would love to find out what happens to spirits after they pass on. There is a small number of them who are convinced that there is an outside somewhere where all spirits go, an underworld, so to speak, except there are others who say there are multiple underworlds for different people of different cultures and different faiths. It's a hotbed issue, but it is believed that this outside is so far beyond the reach of most of us that it's only worth speculating about. No one is ever going to get there and come back again. Orpheus is, we are not. But beyond that, you can find a lot of fun among the Gaki. I once knew one, his name was Mitsuru. He was a host of a TV show. Yes, a celebrity of a sort, very regional based. And he would go around visiting these haunted sites with a crew. He was like a student, a lot of fun. And I remember seeing the episode where he blatantly, brazenly ate a spirit on TV. This was an episode that was seen by, if not over 1 million people, at least in the hundreds of thousands. And it was repeated. It was shown in clip shows of other most haunted things broadcast in other parts of the world. What is our host doing? And I knew, watching him, this is a Gaki who is visiting a genuine haunted house and on camera is displaying his power. He is siphoning existence from the spirit world in front of our eyes. Because no one watching, outside of us, the accursed, would believe what he was doing. There was a kind of nervous laughter. There were reviews posted. People were posting in Reddit threads. What was he doing? in that part of last night's episode? Was he pretending to consume a ghost? No, he was eating on camera. And he said afterwards, I guess I'm a Gaki now. Looking directly down that lens. As their matriarch told me, the Gaki have power. The name has power. There are people who will watch that, hungry and other accursed, who will watch that and think, shit, these Gaki, they are boxing without gloves. Interesting. Interesting to see where they will go, whether it's desperation that drives them to such straits or whether it is just a pure boldness. I guess we will have to see. I suppose in this particular video I've not told you where the Gaki came from. That is a subject of pure conjecture at this time. The one thing I've heard more frequently than any other, and although I don't know how much to attribute it with truth, is that the first Gaki, the Matriarch, was in fact originally one of the dead. That she possessed a body, and through necromantic arts and curses, she used that body to consume another of the dead. She had discovered a form of undeath, a form of bridge between being alive and being dead. She was no longer a spirit, she could no longer leave her body, and now she could eat the dead. That's the story I've heard. I did ask her about it, the matriarch, and she prefers the madam. And the madam told me, well, she laughed in my face and said, do you really think it was that simple for me to do that? Do you think it was just one act? Do you think I just slew one person? Do you think I consumed one person and became what I am today? Oh no, she said. The death toll was much higher.